because with the joys of Facebook, I get to hear a lot about what people think they know about the budget. So number one, the tax increase. Okay, let's start with that. Yes, there is a tax increase. Okay, our personal rate went from 3.75 to 4.95. Figures lie, liars figure, right? So there's a lot of misinterpretation of that. A lot of people thought that the tax rate was going up to 32%. Okay? The tax rate was not going up to 32%. If you do the math, 1.2% increase from 3.75 is a 32% increase. So the rate was increased by 32%. It goes from 3.75 to 4.95. We'll talk a little bit more about the rate. I have a great deal of frustration with that. The next big whopper I hear is that how there were no cuts? Why didn't you make cuts? So in this budget alone, there were $3 billion in cuts over current spending. $3 billion. And that was $1 billion more than Governor Rauner himself proposed. Okay? So there were tremendous cuts in this budget. We cut state agencies across the board at 5%, state universities by 10%, which I think is atrocious. That really bothers me, but that's hard to compromise, again. And most of the rest of the spending got set at 2015 levels, which over the last 15 years have been cut year after year after year after year after year after year as we've dealt with these financial problems. So an additional $3 billion of cuts on top of it. It is actually a lot. So there were a lot of cuts. One of my favorites is this. Okay, yeah, you guys passed a budget. Why'd you make the tax increase so big, and yet you didn't even bother to do enough to pay down the debts? To which I say, I don't know how your calculator works, but if the tax increase, if we were going to do more to pay down the debts, we probably would have needed a higher tax increase. So you can't complain that the rate is too high, and at the same time complain that we didn't do enough to pay down the debts. There is a surplus in this budget. It is balanced. There is a surplus. That surplus can be leveraged to pay down the debt. Does it pay it down fast enough? Not nearly enough. Okay? And I tell you this honestly because these are the things that as Illinois moves forward, we have to be cognizant of what's next. We're far from done. Okay? So those are the big whoppers in a nutshell that I wanted to, the myths that I wanted to dispel about this budget. So let's go back and talk about that 4.95% rate. I've had a lot of interest in playing with the math on this, trying to figure out how we can adjust the numbers to accomplish the things that we want to do. Math for finances and money and policy, right? So, we came up with 4.95%, right? We sat down and went through the math and looked at our debts and figured out we needed to spend. No, we didn't do any of that. We didn't do any of that. We got to 4.95% because in negotiations with our friends on the other side of the aisle and with Governor Rauner, whose staff was in there, they said, oh, no, we're not agreeing to any tax increase unless it's less than what Quinn did. His was at 5, we'll agree to 4.95 and no more. That was the math that we used to solve the budget. Okay. What would I have done differently? And on Facebook Live, so this is public, so I'm not ashamed of this. I was advocating for an additional 0.5%. Yes, I was advocating for a higher tax increase than we got. But I wanted that additional 0.5% surcharge to be dedicated solely to the reduction of debt. That money could be spent for no other purpose other than reducing this massive backlog of bills that we have. And when we got down to a predetermined level, we'd go away. And I thought that would be prudent. But again, that was math, and that has no place in Springfield. So we wanted 4.95. It's going to take us longer to pay back those bills. That's not a good thing. So under Governor Rauner, once the budget impasse hit, we were spending $39 billion a year. We're taking in $32 billion a year for 2 years. Well, that's roughly $8 billion a year. And if you move the numbers around, you can imagine, it's not too hard to imagine, that we accumulated an additional $11 billion in debt, right? Makes sense. So that $11 billion in debt, when we don't pay that timely, we pay interest on that. How much interest do we pay? 1% per month. Okay? 12% per year on that debt. So I would rather see us, I think fiscally responsible thing to do is pay that down, get that monkey off of our back. One of the problems that we were faced with this budget impasse as we were getting to the end, and we were at the edge of this fiscal cliff. Many people have heard about this fiscal cliff. Had we gone over, there were going to be some very, very negative things that would have happened. And I'm going to talk about those in just a second, but this is why when I characterize this, so many people say, well, what was your decision? Why did you choose to raise taxes instead of not raise taxes? That was not the decision, ladies and gentlemen. The decision wasn't, should I raise taxes or not raise taxes? If you look at the math, and I would be happy to sit down with anybody and go through this with you. If we had gone over the fiscal cliff, the effects that would have happened from that, going over that cliff, what we would have needed to do to resurrect ourselves, I assure you, would have been a lot more than 4.95. It would have been a lot more than 5.5. Probably would have been somewhere around 7. And why? Well, we were going to get downgraded to junk bond status. Now, I hear this a lot, and I agree with this statement completely. The first thing you should do when you're an elected official and you have a budget crisis is eliminate waste, right? And we all agree that you should eliminate waste. Can I tell you the most wasteful thing I've seen in Springfield? In Springfield, now, our state government, and I say ours because it belongs to all of us. This was, I sit on the revenue committee and I get to actually hear not just politicians come and speak before us, people who actually know what they're talking about, like economists. So I had a finance guy from Nuveen, they're a big bond analysis firm, and what they told us was that they could actually put a dollar figure on what we spend per year in additional interest on our bonds because our credit's been downgraded successfully, right? Anyone want to guess how much we spend a year? Now remember, you're going to sell bonds, you have to pay interest on it. This is above and beyond what we should be paying in interest. Maybe we want to venture a guess at how much we pay in penalty interest every year? Anybody? How much? $1 billion a year. $1 billion a year goes to bondholders in the form of additional interest, simply because we didn't balance our budget and address our debts. If we'd gone to junk status, and I asked this, immediately $200 million a year. Okay? And if we didn't pass the budget, again, we're still operating, we're spending more than we're taking in, so the backlog grows. In a year, it would have been at $24 billion instead of $16 billion. So we would have been crushed under that debt. And the kicker is that the state universities would have immediately lost accreditation. And I'm not kidding when I say that. That's not my interpretation. They would have immediately lost their accreditation. Can you imagine every university in the state, other than the University of Illinois, losing its accreditation? Western, Eastern, Southern, Northern, Northeastern University. So what happens when you lose accreditation, right? Your students are no longer eligible for Pell Grants. Well, now think about that, right? We have a lot of middle-class families, and every middle-class family here, their dream is to send their kids to college, right? Well, good news, in Illinois, we have AP education. You can satisfy college credits in high school and thus save money on tuition because you don't have to pay for those classes in college. Number two, we have MAP grants. This is monetary assistance to help middle-income and low-income kids go to school. Number three, we have state universities, right? Northwestern University, $60,000 a year. University of Illinois, $15,000 a year. But with the cuts that were proposed, and I'm not kidding, I'll go through the math, on that alone, on those three items alone, it could cost a family $33,000 more to send a kid to a state university. $33,000 more in tuition. If you lose accreditation, no Pell Grants, no federal Pell Grants. There would be nobody going to our state universities. It would collapse. And as you can imagine, in Mattoon, Illinois, where Western Illinois is, and in Charleston, where Eastern Illinois is, those universities are the economic hub of those communities. Those communities would collapse. It would have been terrible. So what we would have had to do would have been massive to resurrect ourselves out of that hole. The decision that we were forced with was, do you continue to fight about this and continue to say no, or do you get a budget and secure it, right? Get your head above water, take a few breaths, look what's in front of you, and try and make the next round of solutions. Reforms, this one's brought up a lot. And you know, I hear this. So you guys passed a budget and no reforms. Not true. Absolutely, completely false. Many of the reforms are reforms that I don't necessarily agree with, right? I'll go into the details of them with you. But these are items of the turnaround agenda that the governor wanted. We passed them in many instances almost exactly the way he wanted. We privatized a state agency that handles economic development, meaning no more citizen input, right? So that's the DCEO, Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. Privatized. Not a big fan of that. We passed government consolidation to allow smaller governments to consolidate into larger forms of government. We passed procurement reform, which makes it easier for the government to buy goods and services, ostensibly to save money. Most people would say, well, why is that a bad thing? It's not. It's a good thing, unless, of course, you understand why it was created in the first place. It was created in the first place back around 2006, when there was another governor named Martwick who was abusing that process. And so people were like, that's crazy, we can't have all this abuse. We need some restrictions. We passed some restrictions. The new governor is saying, it's too restrictive, get rid of those. So how well do you trust your government, right? That's what it comes down to. We passed a lot of other reforms too. So there were things out there that we did. We passed many of the reforms that he was looking for. I'm trying to think if I'm missing anything. That's the Illinois budget in a nutshell. So again, my analysis of it, is it perfect? No. It's a long way from perfect, but it stabilizes the state, and that's far better than what the alternative would have been. If we had gone off that cliff, it would have been atrocious, and the pain and suffering that had been caused would have taken so long to recover from that. It would have been devastating. So at least we're secure, and that means it's just time to get back to work and try and pass some things that I think are real reforms, like, you know, I don't know. Again, this is that whole, I don't know, I'm obsessed with this math thing, right? Like if you have financial problems and they're like numbers and all that, it's probably good to get some people who know math and you sit down and you do some math. And, you know, if you do a little bit of math, you find out that Illinois is very inefficient in the way that we raise and spend tax dollars, our money. We don't do a good job of it, right? And we have a long way to go, but I think that if we were a little bit more efficient, if we followed the good examples of some of our neighbors in neighboring states and we looked more like they did in terms of our financial picture, we might be a little bit more competitive. And you know, we'll move on from there. But that's my presentation on the budget. I'm going to leave it open to questions. I'm imagining there are a few. Yes?
We talked a lot about revenue from taxes.
Yes.
And I just wondered if there were other ideas for revenue. For example, like legalizing marijuana.
So the question was, for those of you who couldn't hear, they're coming at you by the way for that. Just the question was, are there other ideas for revenue? And she suggested legalization of recreational marijuana. I assume you meant recreational, right? Because we already have the medicinal one. Some other thing, yeah. So the revenue items that are left on the table are not panaceas, right? So they will help the problem. They will not alleviate and fix the problem. So recreational marijuana, for what it's worth, I am a co-sponsor of the bill that would make marijuana legal recreation. And there are 16, 17 states that now have it. Once again, Illinois is behind the curve on this. It's not that hard to do. Personally, I would like to see, we've got the framework in place with medicinal marijuana. I think it's time. I think we can move there. I think we need the revenue, and I think that the fight that we're having from a criminal perspective is wasteful in terms of our resources. And in this state, we don't need to waste resources. The other option is gaming expansion. Chicago Casino. Again, I don't like raising revenue off things that I think could be harmful. But to be fair, if we can't get rid of gaming and you know, I mean, you can go to the 7-Eleven, you can watch somebody put down $200 and buy lotto tickets and scratch them off. Winner, you need more, you know. So you can gamble wherever you want. There's online gambling and all that. So I'm for expansion as well because again, we need the revenue and It's already pervasive. Okay, lots of questions. You were next, yes.
Has anybody talked about making the income tax be more progressive?
Progressive income tax is the question. And yes, thank you. I'll clap for that. I actually have a plan for progressive income tax. Remember I said modeling other states? So I say this, and not tongue-in-cheek, really. I say this, it almost sounds tongue-in-cheek. But I often hear, you should be more like Wisconsin. Do the way they do things up in Wisconsin. I say, okay, let's start with their income tax, right? So we now have a 4.95% flat rate. They have a rate that starts out at 4 for people who are less able to afford the tax, and ends at 7.65 for their highest earners, anyone making over $250,000 a year. That would raise an additional roughly $8 billion a year. The problem in Illinois, anytime you talk about tax raise, is that citizens generally don't trust their government. And Illinois' track record isn't good, so they're like, we're going to give you $8 billion, you're going to waste it. And that's not an unfair characterization, right? So the plan that I developed was not just dropping in the income tax, but it talked how we had to spend that money. I would put $1 billion a year additional above and beyond our actuarially required pension payment. The sooner we reduce the debt in our pensions, the payment amount will come down, freeing up more money under our budget. I would also put an additional $1 billion a year towards our unpaid debt, and I would put $3 billion a year into education, and it would be something that's been talked about since 1992. It's not my idea. It was an idea that was brought up by Don Falconetti. It was supported by Republican Governor Jim Edgar. It's called a tax swap. So you put income tax money towards education. You bring up the funding from education and you drop property taxes. And again, that's what's going on in our neighboring states. They have higher income taxes, but they fund K-12 education far better than we do. We are dead last in the country in terms of funding K-12 education. So yes, I fully support that idea. It's tough. We got real close, but we're not there yet. So, yes, sir.
Is there any real chance of prison reform in our state? I mean, it's a massive amount of money. Women are the fastest growing population in prisons for nonviolent crime. It's usually drug addiction related to theft and prostitution. We've made a business out of locking up minorities, and I think we're tired of it.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Thank you. That's a very good question. I don't know if everybody's heard of. He's talking about prison reform, criminal justice reform, really. And the good news is I'm happy to report that there is a great appetite for criminal justice reform in Springfield, and not just from Democrats, but from Republicans. This is a bipartisan desire to, and for a number of reasons. Number one, morally, it's just wrong what we're doing. Number two, you don't care about the morals. It costs a lot of money, right? So if we can find a way to shrink the size of our prison population and handle things like you talk about, low-level offenses, nonviolent offenses, drug offenses, treat a disease, don't incarcerate the person. One of the very first bills that I worked on, something I'm very proud of, was removing the felony upgrade for prostitution. Okay? So for many years, you got picked up for prostitution, it was a misdemeanor. You got picked up again, it might be a misdemeanor again, but by the time you get around the third time, you're gonna lock that person up, stick them in jail. Well, anybody, and I mean everybody knows this, right? Police officers know this, people who are big law and order folks know this. The prostitute is not the criminal, the prostitute is the victim. And when you saddle that person with a felony on their record, they will never get out from under that. They will never be able to get away from that life. And so we remove that. So that's just one small example. But there are so many criminal justice bills going on, and I'd be happy to connect with you later and give you a whole list of all the stuff that's going on. But the last 5 years has really been picking up steam. So there's good stuff coming. I guess that's the short answer. So yes, ma'am.
Is there any possibility to get a state bank?
State bank is something that is been talked about a lot. They do it in North Dakota. I confess, it hasn't got a lot of traction here. I see the good in it, but it just, the person who's advocating for it, they're not getting any traction right now. And as you can imagine, in the last 2.5 years, all of the oxygen in the room was eaten up by the budget, and what little was left, we focused on other things. So that might be something that works its way into the discussion. What's it? It might, I guess. The question is yes, I think there's a possibility. To be honest, I'm not that well versed in it, but I know North Dakota uses it to great advantage. So there are people that are advocating for it.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but if somebody were in a better position to negotiate bonds or buy other debt from other banks, and I mean, I'm just throwing it out there, because
Yeah.
it seems like there's other institutions buying more debt,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
At a cheaper rate than they're issuing it to the state of Illinois, so why can't we do that later?
Right. Right. It's a good.
Yes.
Yes. It's definitely something that we need to look into. Yes, I appreciate it. Yes.
So, you mentioned earlier about the tax increase. So why not just bite the bullet and charge everyone 7%? Why not? I mean, and just reduce the debt right now. Why push it down the road? Why just make the decision and do it right now?
Well, that's a good question, and I imagine that there are a number of people in the legislature who might have advocated for that. So there was one proposal that someone had moved the tax rate to 7%, but since we are not allowed by our Constitution to have a progressive rate, what they suggested was we could build progressivity in by raising the personal exemptions, right? So I'd have to show you the math, but as the personal exemptions go up, you can actually raise the exemptions with the tax rate so that people at a certain income level, let's just say median income, $58,000 a year for a family, right? So you could build it so that even though the rate went from 3.75 to 7, they pay exactly the same. What that does is that tilts the rate, right? So because the
It's a
exemption is
progressive
the
tax,
same.
remember. It's still progressive tax.
It's a